When the story of this journey begins, the world around a young pianist named Lena felt small and quiet, yet full of hidden wonders she had not discovered. She lived in a simple neighborhood where most families worked long days and came home tired, and where dreams were often whispered rather than spoken aloud. Her home was warm but modest, the kind of place where every object had been repaired at least once, and where people learned early how to make things last. Despite the simplicity of her surroundings, music was one thing that seemed to always find a way into the house. Lena's mother often hummed while cooking, and her grandfather used to tap gentle rhythms on the table whenever he was deep in thought. Lena was not the type of child who showed off talent or tried to be the center of attention. Instead, she watched the world with a quiet curiosity, the kind that made her notice small details like how the leaves moved differently depending on the wind, or how footsteps sounded softer on rainy days. She didn't know that these small observations were shaping her understanding of rhythm and emotion long before she ever touched a piano. Her family did not own any fancy instruments. The only thing close to music equipment in the house was an old radio with a bent antenna that only worked if you placed a book under the left side. Even then, the sound was often fuzzy. Most of the time, Lena listened to whatever stations came through clearly, usually local talk shows or traditional songs that her grandparents knew by heart. But everything changed the day she wandered into her grandmother's attic. It wasn't a place she visited often because it was dark, dusty, and filled with boxes stacked in unstable towers. But that afternoon, her grandmother had asked her to bring down a bag of winter blankets. As she climbed the wooden stairs, she felt the air grow cooler, carrying a mixture of old fabric, wood, and something else she couldn't quite place at first. When she reached the top, sunlight streamed through a small round window. Lighting up the floating dust, she carefully stepped around old suitcases and boxes, labeled with faded handwriting, until something unexpected caught her eye. A wooden crate pushed halfway under a shelf. It looked older than everything else around it, and one corner had splintered slightly. The lid wasn't closed all the way, and inside she could see thin, square shapes that didn't look like books. Curious, she pulled the crate out. Inside was a small stack of vinyl records, each tucked inside worn cardboard covers. Most of them featured portraits of composers or dramatic paintings of orchestras. Lena didn't recognize any of the names, but something about the artwork made her pause. She gently picked up the one on top. The cover showed a grand hall bathed in golden light, with a pianist sitting alone at a shining black piano. Lena didn't understand why her breath caught a little. Maybe it was the sense of stillness in the picture, or maybe the idea that someone could sit alone and create something heard by so many others. She called down the stairs to her grandmother, asking if she could look at the records. Her grandmother laughed softly and told her she could take them all if she wanted. They had belonged to her great-uncle, who had loved classical music, but passed away before Lena was born. Taking the crate downstairs felt like carrying treasure. Her grandmother helped her set up an old record player that had been gathering dust in a corner cabinet. The player hummed as it warmed up, and when Lena placed the first record on the turntable, she felt a thrill of anticipation. She lowered the needle carefully, just as her grandmother showed her. At first, there was only a soft crackling sound. Then the music began. It was gentle at the start, like someone whispering thoughts that were too delicate for words. The melody rose and fell, and as it played, Lena felt something shift inside her. The music didn't just fill the room, it seemed to fill her chest, her mind, even the space behind her eyes. She couldn't explain it, but she felt as if the music understood things she never knew how to say. Her grandmother watched her quietly, then nodded as if she had expected this reaction. She told Lena that classical music was like a story without words, a way of sharing emotions across time. Lena didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't want to break the moment. From that day on, listening to those records became part of her daily routine. She didn't always understand the emotions behind the pieces, but she felt them deeply. Some pieces made her feel warm and safe, like the first sunlight after winter. Others were heavier, filled with sadness and longing, yet somehow beautiful in their pain. Still others lifted her spirit, making her imagine grand halls and shining lights, or the rush of wind on a mountaintop. One evening, Her mother came home from work and found Lena sitting cross-legged beside the record player, her eyes closed as she listened. Her mother watched her for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. She had always known Lena was sensitive and thoughtful, but seeing her so connected to something unseen made her curious. When she asked Lena what she liked about the music, Lena struggled to find the right words. She finally said it made her feel like she was traveling somewhere familiar, but still unknown. Her mother smiled softly and said that maybe it was a good sign. Maybe music was something Lena was meant to explore, but exploring it wasn't easy. Her family didn't have money for piano lessons, and the nearest music school was far away. For a while, Lena didn't see a path forward. She simply listened to the records, absorbing every note, letting the melodies shape her imagination. She began tapping rhythms on the table unconsciously, sometimes matching the music she remembered, sometimes creating her own. One afternoon, Lena was at a neighbor's house helping carry groceries when she noticed something unusual in their living room. An old upright piano pushed against the wall. It had scratches on the sides and the keys were yellowed, but it was still beautiful to her. The neighbor saw her staring and chuckled, explaining that the piano belonged to his daughter, who no longer used it. He invited Lena to press a key. She hesitated, unsure if she should, but when he encouraged her again, she gently touched one of the middle keys. The note rang out clearly, warmer and fuller than anything she had ever heard. Lena felt a strange rush, something like excitement mixed with longing. She pressed another key, then another. She didn't know what she was doing, but each sound made her feel more alive. Her neighbor watched her for a moment, before asking if she wanted to come by occasionally to practice. He explained that it was better for someone to use the piano than for it to sit untouched. Lena's eyes brightened in a way she couldn't hide. She thanked him repeatedly, trying hard not to seem too excited. But the moment she got home, she told her mother what had happened. Her mother agreed, grateful that someone was offering something she couldn't provide. From then on, Lena visited the neighbor's house every weekend. At first, she only played single notes and simple combinations. She didn't know any techniques, but she remembered the melodies from the records, and she tried to find pieces of them on the keys. Slowly, she discovered how the sounds connected. Sometimes she played off-key or created strange chords by accident, but every mistake helped her learn a little more. Weeks passed, then months. Lena's connection to music deepened. The more she played, the more she understood that music was not just about making sound, it was about listening, feeling, and letting emotion guide the hands. She didn't think of becoming a performer or impressing anyone. All she wanted was to understand the feeling she had the first time she heard that record. Her neighbor noticed her dedication and told her she had a natural gift. Lena didn't know if she believed him, but she knew she felt something special every time she sat at the piano. She felt as though the instrument was speaking to her, telling her things she had felt but never understood. One rainy afternoon, as she sat at the piano, she tried to play a melody from one of the records, a piece filled with longing and gentle sorrow. She played slowly, repeating parts when her fingers stumbled. Suddenly, she realized she wasn't just copying the music anymore. She was adding slight changes, tiny variations that came from her own feelings. It surprised her, but it also thrilled her. That was the first moment Lena understood that music wasn't just something to follow. It was something to shape. Her journey had only begun. But something inside her had awakened, a desire to explore emotions through sound. She didn't know where this path would lead or how many challenges she would face. But she knew one thing for certain: music had found her, and she was ready to follow it. When Lena entered the youth conservatory for the first time, she felt as though she had stepped into another world. The building stood tall and polished, with large windows that reflected the sky. Inside, the hallways echoed with running footsteps, whispers, and the distant sound of instruments being tuned. Everything felt bigger and louder than what she was used to. She tightened her grip on her small backpack, trying not to look nervous, even though her heart was beating hard. Joining the conservatory had felt like a dream, one she'd never expected to reach. Her neighbor had told a friend about her piano interest, and that friend had mentioned a program that offered a small number of scholarships. Lena never imagined she would be chosen, but someone on the panel said they heard something honest in the way she played. Those words stayed with her. Honest. She didn't know if it meant she was good, but it meant something. But now, as she walked through the hallway, she wondered if they had made a mistake. Most of the students seemed far more confident. Some carried folders stuffed with music sheets. Others laughed together as if they had known each other for years. A tall boy played a quick melody on a nearby piano, fingers moving so fast that Lena blinked in surprise. She had never seen anyone her age play like that. As she listened, a small doubt crept in. Maybe she didn't belong here. Maybe she was too far behind. She was still thinking about this when a teacher approached her. He was an older man with sharp eyes behind thin glasses. He introduced himself as Maestro Verdine, the instructor in charge of the beginner and intermediate piano groups. His voice was calm but carried the kind of tone that made Lena stand up straighter. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded quickly, even though she wasn't sure. He led her to a classroom filled with pianos placed in rows. The other students were already seated, warming up or chatting. Lena found an empty seat near the back and took a slow breath. She hoped the others wouldn't notice how unsure she felt. The class began with scales. Long, repetitive patterns up and down the keyboard. To Lena, scales felt stiff, like walking in straight lines, when what she loved was exploring open spaces. But she followed the instructions. She wanted to do well. As the weeks went by, she realized the conservatory was not what she expected. She had imagined a place full of music that carried emotion and warmth, like the vinyl records she loved. But here everything felt strict and structured. Lessons were filled with rules: how to sit, how to angle your hands, how long to practice each exercise. It wasn't that Lena hated structure. She understood that learning required discipline, but she felt something missing. Whenever she tried to play with feeling, Maestro Verdin corrected her. "Don't add emotion where it doesn't belong," he said more than once. Emotion. That was what drew her to music in the first place. But at the conservatory, she soon learned that emotions came after technique. At least, that was what they believed. One afternoon, Maestro Verdin assigned each student a classical piece to learn for the upcoming regional showcase. Lena was given a piece that felt cold, too precise, heavy, full of repeating patterns. She practiced it endlessly, trying to make every note perfect. But the more she practiced, the less connected she felt. The other students seemed to thrive. Some even competed to see who could play their pieces at faster speeds. They joked about getting the highest praise from the judges. Dreaming about future competitions, Lena watched them and wondered why she didn't feel the same thrill. She practiced late into the nights. Her fingers grew tired. Sometimes her arms ached. But every time she slowed down, she imagined the disappointed look Maestro Verdin would give her. So she pushed through, but something inside her was changing. The warm spark she once felt for music. The one that started with the old vinyl record began to dim. She didn't talk about this with anyone. She didn't want her mother to worry. She didn't want her neighbor to regret recommending her. She didn't want Maestro Verdin to think she wasn't serious, so she kept practicing. On the day of the regional showcase, Lena stood backstage with the other students from her class. They were dressed neatly, each holding their music sheets tightly. The air smelled faintly of stage lights and dust. Everyone's voice sounded slightly louder, probably from nerves. Lena's stomach twisted. She had practiced the piece more times than she could count. She knew every note, but she still didn't feel connected to it. When her turn came, she walked onto the stage, keeping her head down. The piano in the center looked beautiful under the lights, its polished surface reflecting the glow from above. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. She began to play. Every note was correct. Every rhythm matched the sheet music. She kept her hands steady, her posture straight. She made no mistakes. But inside, she felt nothing. When she finished, the audience gave a polite round of applause. Not loud, not excited, just polite. She bowed slightly and walked off the stage, her heart sinking. She didn't need the judges' feedback to know what they would say, and later, when the scores were announced, her suspicion proved true. Her score wasn't terrible, but it wasn't impressive either. Next to her name, A short comment had been written, technically strong, but lacking emotional depth. She stared at the words for a long moment, her chest tightening. Emotional depth. The very thing she used to feel most strongly. The very thing Maestro Verdine told her to hold back when she returned to the conservatory the next week. The atmosphere felt different. Some students celebrated their high scores. Others complained about small mistakes. But no one mentioned Lena's performance, and she was quietly relieved. Maestro Verdin gave feedback to each student. When he reached Lena, he said, "Your technique has improved, but you need more discipline. You must learn to control your emotions, not let them control you." She nodded, but something inside her shifted sharply. Control her emotions. She wasn't even allowed to express them. Over the following months, the pressure increased. The exercises became more complex, the expectations heavier. Lena practiced so much that the piano keys sometimes felt like weights pressing on her fingertips. She no longer looked forward to lessons. She no longer rushed to the record player when she got home. Music, the thing she once loved, now felt like a test she kept failing. Still, she didn't quit. She didn't want to disappoint anyone. One afternoon, after an especially long practice session, she stayed behind while the other students left. The room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. She sat at her piano, staring at the keys. A lump grew in her throat. She lifted her hands to play something, anything, but they hovered in the air, unwilling to move. She didn't want to play the assigned piece. She didn't want to follow the rules, but she also didn't know what she wanted. She pressed a single key. The sound echoed softly. Then she pressed another, and another. She tried to remember the emotion-filled pieces she used to listen to from her great-uncle's records. But her mind felt blank, as though the music had drifted out of reach. Her eyes burned as frustration built inside her. She felt like she was losing herself, before she could stop herself. She closed the piano quietly and stood up, leaving the practice room with slow steps. That night, she didn't practice. That week, she barely touched the piano at home. Her mother noticed the change. Akina always insisted she was just tired. Some part of her still hoped her passion would come back on its own. That maybe the spark she felt as a child would return, but it didn't. Not until the day everything changed. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. During a weekly group session, Maestro Verdine entered with a new instructor beside him. Everyone sat up straighter when they saw the new figure, a calm-looking man with gentle eyes and a slight smile. Maestro Verdine introduced him as Professor Sato, a guest mentor who specialized in emotional interpretation. The class exchanged curious glances. Emotional interpretation? That wasn't something Maestro Verdine ever talked about. Professor Sato listened quietly as the students played their assigned pieces one by one. He didn't comment right away. Instead, he observed each student with an expression that seemed to look deeper than the surface. When Lena's turn came, she sat at the piano feeling nervous. She played her piece cleanly, just as she had practiced. But when she finished, Professor Sato didn't comment on her accuracy. Instead, he asked softly, "How did you feel while playing?" The question startled her. How did she feel? She had spent so long trying not to feel anything at all. She hesitated before answering. I don't know." He nodded thoughtfully, not judging her. "That's okay," he said. "Sometimes we lose our way. Music can help us find it again, but only if we remember why we began." Were settled into her mind like seeds, for the first time in months. Someone wasn't asking her to play perfectly. Someone was asking her to feel, and without knowing it in that moment, her journey began to change direction. She didn't realize yet how important this new mentor would become. She didn't realize that the spark she thought she had lost was still inside her, waiting to be uncovered, but she would soon. And that was the beginning of everything. The first few weeks with Professor Sato felt different from anything Lena had experienced before. From the moment he arrived at the conservatory, a soft shift seemed to move through the building. Students whispered about him in the hallways, curious about the teacher who was known not for sharp technique or strict discipline, but for something far harder to teach: emotion in music. For Lena, his arrival felt like someone had opened a small window in a room that had been closed for too long. He didn't rush into teaching complicated concepts. Instead, he spent time watching, listening, and noticing the things other instructors overlooked. He paid attention to how each student sat, how their fingers moved, how their breath changed when they felt nervous or confident. His calm presence made many students feel seen in a way they hadn't before. When he spoke, his voice was steady and warm. "Music," he said one morning, "is not about proving anything. It's about sharing something." Some students nodded politely, unsure what he meant. Others exchanged confused looks. Sharing something? They were used to competing, not sharing. But Lena understood a little of what he meant, even if she couldn't put it into words. One afternoon, during a small group lesson, Professor Sato pulled up a chair beside Lena as she sat at the piano. She felt her heartbeat pick up. No teacher had ever sat so close before. Most preferred to stand behind or pace around the room. He simply sat there, patient, inviting her to play when she was ready. She started with the piece she had been assigned, a melodic but technically structured composition. She played carefully, hoping not to make any mistakes. Halfway through, she felt her hands tighten, as if someone were watching every move. When she finished, she kept her eyes on the keys, expecting corrections. But instead of giving her a list of what she did wrong, Professor Sato asked quietly, "What were you trying to say?" She blinked, confused. I don't know. I was just trying to play it correctly." He nodded softly. "That is what I heard." Her shoulders lowered, embarrassed. Then he added gently, "But I also heard something wanting to get out. Something you held back." Lena slowly looked up, unsure if he was right or if he only imagined it. She didn't think she had held anything back, but now that she thought about it, maybe she had. For so long, she played with the fear of being wrong. Maybe fear had replaced emotion. Professor Sato stood, walked to the shelves, and picked out a different piece of sheet music. He placed it on the stand in front of her. "Try this," he said. "Don't worry about playing it perfectly. Just listen to it first. Then play the way it feels, not the way it is written." The idea felt strange, almost like breaking a rule. But something inside her was curious. She studied the notes for a moment. The melody was gentle, almost fragile, like something that could be broken by rushing. She placed her fingers on the keys and started playing. Her first attempt was shaky. She made mistakes. She hesitated. But something was different. Her breathing was slower. And she wasn't thinking about the judges or Maestro Verdine or anyone else. She was only thinking about the sound. When she finished, she let her hands fall onto her lap, surprised by how different she felt. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close. But it felt like her. Professor Sato gave a small smile. "You see," she nodded, though she didn't completely understand it yet. Over the following weeks, he continued guiding her slowly, never pushing too hard. He gave her small exercises to try playing a piece while thinking of a memory, or changing the tempo to match a certain emotion. He didn't care if the notes were wrong. He said mistakes were part of finding one's voice. That idea shocked Lena at first. Mistakes allowed? Encouraged? But with him, mistakes weren't something to fear. They were steps. One day he asked her to play something without sheet music at all. "Make something," he said. "Anything. Don't think, just play." She froze for a moment. Creating something from nothing felt impossible, but he didn't look impatient. He simply waited. So she played a small line of notes. Simple, uneven, but hers. She added another line, then another. Before she realized it, she had created a fragile little melody that reminded her of the attic where she first found the vinyl records. When she finished, her hands trembled slightly. She felt exposed, like she had shown someone a piece of her heart. Professor Sato nodded with quiet satisfaction. "That is music," he said. She didn't say anything, but she felt something shift inside her, something like a locked door quietly opening, as weeks turned into months. Lena found herself changing. She no longer dreaded going to the conservatory. She still practiced technique because it mattered, but she no longer let it consume her. Instead, she found a balance. The spark she lost had begun glowing again. Small, soft but real. Outside of class, she started exploring music differently. She listened to the old vinyl records again, but with new ears. She noticed things she never caught before: the way certain passages slowed, as if the composer was taking a breath, or how some sections felt like whispered thoughts. One evening, she listened to a piece she remembered loving as a child. It had a slow, searching melody that made her think of walking alone through a quiet forest. As she listened, she realized something. The music she loved most wasn't flawless. It wasn't cold or perfectly timed. It was human. That realization stayed with her. At the conservatory, she wasn't the only one who noticed her change. Some students asked how she suddenly played with more feeling. Others looked at her with quiet curiosity. A few seemed dismissive, as if emotion wasn't something that mattered. She didn't mind. She wasn't playing for them. But one person who did notice deeply was Maestro Verdin. During a class practice, he listened to Lena play a piece with soft, emotional expression. When she finished, he inspected her performance with a critical eye. "Your technique is slipping," he said sharply. Lena felt a small sting. "I'll keep practicing," she replied. He narrowed his eyes. "Emotion is fine, but not at the cost of precision. Don't lose discipline." She nodded politely, but in her heart she disagreed. She wasn't losing discipline. She was finding balance. Not everyone would understand that. One afternoon, near the end of autumn, Professor Sato asked Lena to stay after the group lesson. She packed her things slowly, wondering if she had made a mistake. When the last student left, he sat beside her again. "You're growing," he said. "But I want you to ask yourself something important. Why do you play?" She stared at the keys. The question settled deep inside her chest. She thought of her grandmother's attic, the record player, the feeling of discovering something powerful and beautiful, the longing she felt when listening to certain melodies, the emptiness she felt when trying to play perfectly, but without emotion. "I play," she said slowly, "because it feels like the only way I can say things I don't know how to explain." Professor Sato nodded. "That is a good answer. Don't forget it." Many students lose their reason. They chase perfection and forget why they began. Lena absorbed his words carefully. He continued, "Technique is a tool. Emotion is the voice. One without the other is incomplete." His teaching stayed with her more deeply than he probably realized. That night, after dinner, she returned to her small keyboard at home. She played softly so she wouldn't disturb anyone. She let her fingers wander, exploring sounds without worrying about the result. For the first time in a long while, she felt peaceful. But things started to change even more when the conservatory announced a winter recital. Each student was required to perform in front of family, teachers, and other guests. It wasn't a competition, but most students treated it like one. Lena felt nervous. But Professor Sato told her he wanted her to choose a piece herself, something that meant something to her. That idea both thrilled and frightened her at home. She searched through her great-uncle's records again, listening to different pieces, waiting for one that felt right. She didn't want to choose something flashy or fast. She wanted something honest. Finally, she found it: a simple, gentle piece she remembered from childhood. It wasn't famous or technically complex, but it had a warm, searching melody that felt like it carried a story. She practiced it slowly, thinking not about perfection, but about what the music made her feel. Some days she felt peaceful, other days uncertain, and her playing changed with her mood. She didn't hide those changes. She let them shape the song. 1 week before the recital, she performed it for Professor Sato. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're learning to speak." Lena wasn't sure if she deserved such words, but they made her chest feel warm. On the day of the recital, the hall buzzed with nervous energy. Students practiced in hallways, trying to calm shaking hands. Parents found seats and whispered among themselves. When Lena's turn came, she walked onto the stage with steady, slow steps. The lights weren't too bright. The audience wasn't too large. She felt nervous, yes, but not afraid. She sat at the piano, took a breath, and started playing. The melody flowed gently, like a quiet confession. She didn't rush. She didn't force anything. She let the music breathe just as Professor Sato taught her. Halfway through, she felt the room grow still, as if people were listening not just to the notes, but to what was behind them. When she finished, the applause was warm, not loud or dramatic, but sincere. Lena bowed lightly and left the stage, her heart full. That night, as she walked home with her mother, the winter air felt crisp against her cheeks. Her mother squeezed her hand gently. "You played beautifully," she said. Lena smiled. "Thank you." But inside, she didn't feel proud in the way she expected. She felt something better. She felt found. Her journey with music wasn't about being the best. It wasn't about winning or proving anything. It was about speaking, feeling, and connecting. And for the first time in a long time, she could see the path ahead more clearly. All because someone finally asked her the question. She didn't know she needed to answer. Days at the small community hall slowly became one of the most meaningful parts of her life. Even though the place was simple, with wooden floors that creaked and windows that sometimes let in a bit too much wind, it carried a kind of warmth she had not felt in a long time. Each time she stepped inside, it felt like stepping into a space where she was allowed to be herself. Without judgment and without pressure, people there didn't care if she touched a wrong note. They cared about the feeling her music brought. At first, she was nervous. Playing for strangers felt different than playing for teachers or judges. These people were not looking for perfect timing or technique. They were looking for comfort or hope, or maybe even a memory they had forgotten. She wasn't sure if she could offer them all that, but she tried anyway, taking slow breaths before she sat at the old upright piano that sat near the wall. The piano had scratches on its side and a few keys that were slightly chipped, but the sound was warm. Every time she pressed a key, it felt like the instrument was speaking back to her. She began to play simple pieces at first, gentle melodies that carried soft emotions without demanding too much from her. And she watched people as she played. Some closed their eyes as if remembering something dear to them. Some smiled. Some even wiped tears quietly, hoping she wouldn't notice. Seeing those reactions changed something inside her. For the first time in a long time, she realized that music didn't need to be perfect to be powerful. It didn't need to impress. It only needed to speak. And people would listen if it spoke honestly. As weeks passed, she grew comfortable performing there. The visitors became familiar faces. There was an older man who always sat in the second row. He rarely spoke, but he always nodded at her before she began to play. There was a young mother who came with her small child, who liked to sit very close to the piano and watch her fingers move. And there were others, each carrying their own stories, their own quiet struggles. She started trying different pieces, ones that she once avoided because they carried a kind of emotional weight she didn't feel ready for. Pieces from composers she admired but never fully understood before. She played a soft nocturne one afternoon, and she felt something in herself loosen. It was as if the melody unlocked a memory she hadn't paid attention to. She remembered the attic, the dusty old record, the way her grandmother's voice softened when she talked about the past. She felt connected to that little girl again, the one who listened to music and felt the world open up. She let herself feel everything fully as she played. That was something her new mentor had told her. Music was not only about skill. It was about allowing yourself to experience whatever lived inside you without hiding it or polishing it too much. And when she followed that advice, the music became something else, something deeper. People noticed the change too. After one performance, a woman approached her with a soft smile. She said the music reminded her of a place she used to visit as a child, a place she forgot she loved. Another person said the melody gave him a sense of peace he had been missing. Hearing these words made her realize that the emotional connection she had been searching for was finally growing stronger. She spent more time practicing at home, not because she felt pressured, but because she genuinely wanted to explore what music could express. She tried playing with different touches, lighter, slower, freer. She experimented with pauses and breaths in the music. She tried to imagine conversations between the notes, as if the piano was telling a story piece by piece. One afternoon, as she practiced a more passionate piece, she realized she had stopped worrying about sounding correct. Her hands moved with a freedom she had never felt before. She was no longer trying to match what she thought the music should be. She was letting it become what it wanted to be. And that change felt like a breakthrough. Her mentor, who visited the community hall once in a while to observe her growth, noticed it too. He sat quietly in the back, listening. When she finished playing, he approached her with gentle pride in his voice. He told her that her music finally carried a sense of truth. He said he could hear her heart in the way she shaped each phrase. And hearing that made her realize how far she had come. Playing in the hall taught her something she could not learn from any conservatory lesson. People were moved by honesty. They didn't need the flashiest performance. They didn't need perfection. They needed connection. When she understood that, her entire approach to music shifted. One day the hall arranged a small celebration event. They asked her to play a longer program because many regular visitors had grown fond of her music. The idea made her nervous, but she agreed. She wanted to offer something meaningful to the people who had unknowingly helped her find herself again. The evening arrived, and the hall was more filled than usual. Some people even stood along the walls because there weren't enough seats. She took a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of so many eyes, but also feeling supported rather than judged. When she began the first piece, a calm melody filled the room. She could hear the soft humming of the old lights, the quiet breaths of the listeners, and even the distant sound of cars outside. But none of it bothered her. She felt grounded, steady, as she moved through her set. She chose pieces that told different emotions: warmth, longing, hope, and quiet reflection. She didn't speak about the pieces. She let the music do all the speaking. Halfway through the program, she played a piece with a deeper emotional pull. As she reached the middle section, she felt a surprising wave of emotion rise in her chest. But instead of holding it back, she allowed it to guide her fingers. And the room felt still, as if everyone was breathing with her. When she played the final note, the hall remained silent for a moment, and then gentle applause filled the air. She felt her eyes warm, not out of pride, but out of gratitude. After the event, several people thanked her, not just for the music but for the feeling she created. One person said the music helped them feel something they had pushed away for too long. Another said they felt understood in a way they hadn't expected. Walking home that night, she felt peaceful. She had not won any competition. She had not played on a grand stage. But she had touched people, and they had touched her. She realized that music, when shared sincerely, could become a bridge between hearts. And this was only the beginning. She felt stronger, more open, and more connected to her purpose. She now understood that classical pieces were not old or distant, they were alive, carrying the stories of people who felt pain, joy, fear, hope, and love. By exploring those emotions, she had begun to discover her own. With every new day, she felt more certain that her journey with music was not just about becoming a skilled performer. It was about discovering the many layers of being human and learning how to express them with honesty. And she knew that wherever music led her next, she would follow with an open heart and a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly play with soul. The final weeks before her recital felt both exciting and frightening. Every morning she woke with a mixture of hope and worry sitting in her chest. This recital was important. It would decide whether she earned a scholarship to a respected music academy, a place she had once dreamed about but never believed she could reach. Now that the moment was so close, she felt the weight of it pressing on her shoulders. But she also felt something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt ready. Not perfectly ready in a technical sense, but emotionally ready. She had learned so much in the past months, not just about music, but about herself. She knew what mattered now. She knew what she wanted to say through her music. That gave her a quiet kind of strength. She practiced every day in the small room at home. The room had a single window, a desk, and her piano. It wasn't fancy, but it had become her space of honesty. When she sat at the piano, she didn't worry about being judged. She let herself feel every emotion that came. She played slow pieces, fast pieces, soft pieces. But every time she finished, she felt drawn to one simple nocturne, same one she had once played in the community hall. There was something about that piece that carried truth. It didn't ask for showmanship. It didn't ask for strength or drama. It asked for sincerity. And she felt deeply that sincerity was what she wanted to bring to the recital. Choosing that nocturne for such an important performance felt risky. People often expected difficult, complex pieces. But she didn't want to pretend. She didn't want to play something only to impress. She wanted to play something that felt like her. Her mentor agreed quietly when she told him her choice. He didn't push her to play anything harder. Instead, he told her that the best performances are the ones that reveal something true. He reminded her that music was not a contest of difficulty, but a language of emotion. His words soothed her heart. She felt seen, understood. That gave her courage. As the recital day approached, she could feel her body growing tense. Sometimes her hands trembled slightly during practice. She would pause, breathe deeply, and try again. She reminded herself that she wasn't going on stage to prove anything. She was going on stage to share something. The night before the recital, she barely slept. She lay awake thinking about the audience, the judges, the piano she had never played before, the lights, the long silence before the first note. She tried to calm herself, telling herself that nervousness was natural. In the morning, she took her time preparing. She didn't rush. She ate a light breakfast and sat quietly near the window, watching the early sunlight touch the rooftops. She thought about her journey, the dusty record in the attic, the rigid training at the conservatory, the frustration, the lessons with her mentor, the community hall, the people whose lives touched hers, and she felt a warmth spread in her chest. She wasn't the same girl who had once played only to please others. She had changed. She had grown. She had learned to listen not just to the notes, but to herself. The recital hall was larger than any place she had performed in before. The ceiling was high, the walls polished, the seats arranged neatly. She felt small walking inside, her heart beating fast. Other performers stood backstage, each dealing with their own nerves. When her name was called, her breath caught. She stepped onto the stage, feeling the lights touch her skin. The hall was quiet. She could see outlines of the audience, though their faces were blurred by the brightness. She walked slowly to the piano and sat down. Placing her hands gently on her lap for a moment, she breathed. She felt the familiar knot of worry tighten. But she also felt something else rise to meet it, a calm, determination. She lifted her hands to the keys. The first note was soft. So soft, she wondered if the people in the back could even hear it. But she didn't press harder. She let the sound float naturally, the way she felt it should. As she moved through the opening lines, her nerves began to melt. Her mind no longer chased thoughts about failure or judgment. Instead, memories rose: her grandmother smiling at the attic record, the old man nodding at her in the community hall, her mentor's gentle words, the quiet comfort of her practice room. All those pieces of her life blended into the music, shaping her touch, her timing, her breath. She played as if she were having a soft conversation with someone she cared about. Every note carried something real. She felt the room grow still. Not stiff, but attentive. The kind of stillness that happens when people are not just listening, they are feeling. As she reached the middle section, she let her emotions guide her. Not in a dramatic way, but in a sincere, human way. She didn't push the melody. She let it unfold naturally, like a gentle story, when she approached the ending. Her hands trembled slightly again, but she didn't fight it. She let the trembling become part of the moment. Because this performance wasn't supposed to be perfect. It was supposed to be honest. When the last note faded, the hall stayed silent for a breath. Then another. She wondered if maybe something had gone wrong. But before she could think more, the silence broke into warm, steady applause. It wasn't the loud, thunderous applause of a dramatic showpiece. It was gentle, heartfelt. It felt like a thank you. She stood slowly, bowed, and walked off the stage. Her legs felt weak, but her heart felt full. Backstage, she didn't rush to hear the results. She didn't need them yet. She sat quietly for a while, letting everything settle inside her. When the results were finally posted, she approached slowly. She scanned the list, and when she saw her name under the scholarship recipients, she felt her breath catch. She had done it. But surprisingly, the first thing she felt wasn't pride. It was peace. Because deep inside, She knew she didn't earn the scholarship because of perfect technique. She earned it because she dared to play with truth. On her way home, she walked slowly through the evening air. The sky was turning soft shades of blue and gold. She felt light, almost weightless. She thought about everything ahead: the academy, the new people she would meet, the music she would explore. But more than anything, she felt grateful. Grateful for her mentor. Grateful for the community hall. Grateful for the difficult days that taught her resilience. Grateful for the music that had stayed with her through every step. She realized then her journey wasn't about reaching a final point. It was about growing, discovering, feeling, and sharing. And she knew she wanted to keep doing that for the rest of her life. As she reached her home, she placed her hand on the piano gently, as if greeting an old friend. She sat down and played the opening notes of the nocturne again. This time, not for practice, not for a recital, but simply for herself. Each note felt like a promise to stay true, to keep learning, to keep feeling deeply. Her journey through emotion had just begun. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She understood now that music was more than sound. It was a reflection of the heart, a bridge between people, a place where the soul could breathe. And she was ready for whatever came next, knowing that as long as she followed the truth in her music, she would never lose her way.